Hello everyone, it's Silvia from Fiddler Tarot. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm very excited because I'm going to show you my most used tarot and oracle decks, and these are decks that I actually use. So I feel like I need to explain. I have been posting on social media when it comes to the tarot community, starting from 4 or 5 years ago. I started first on Instagram, then I moved on to YouTube. Less than 2 years ago, actually, there will be my 2 years tarot tube anniversary on the 14th of December. And there will be a giveaway for that. And I noticed that sometimes it just so happens that I'm using decks for the purpose of filming a video, for the purpose of taking photos. And they are not necessarily coming into my decks rotation. So by decks rotation, I mean the decks that I'm actually reading with or I'm using in my tarot practice every day for a certain amount of time. I'm one of those persons that uses a monthly rotation. So I decide, towards the end of a month, I decide what decks I'm going to be using the month that coming next. And there's a number of reasons why I may choose one deck rather than another. But there's a few really important decks in my collection, which is a rather big collection. So if this is the first time that you're watching my channel, welcome. I hope you'll subscribe and you'll watch more videos. I have more or less I have just shy of 600 decks between Tarot, Oracle, Lenormand, Keeper, and other divination systems. Between mass market and indie decks, out of print, still in print, you name it. When you have a vast collection, the problem is getting through them, churning through all of the decks. And of course, some of them are collectible items, so I really do not get near them because I don't want to ruin them. But let's face it, the majority of them are actually decks that I bought because I want to use them. When you have so many, there can be a little bit of overwhelm sometimes in deciding which ones I want to use. But it's also true that when you have a tarot tube channel, you also feel, at least that is in my case, I don't know if that's the case for everyone else, but I feel sometimes that I'm showing decks for certain types of recommendation, and then in my daily practice, I don't actually need that specific deck because I'm not doing that specific thing the deck is recommended for. So if I'm recommending decks for emotional healing, for example, I may spend one whole week without using any of those decks because in that particular week, I don't necessarily need emotional healing. It is videos that I love making because it is my way to try and share my own experiences of tarot reader and collector for over 36 years now. To others, with others, and it is almost my kind of legacy. Obviously, I'm trying to pass on to others my experience with tarot and the spiritual world. So I love filming those videos. But if you at any given time had a look at my reading room and my reading desk, more often than not, you will see different decks. So this is what we're going to have a look at today. Okay, so we're going to start with the bang. So this is the Tibia Moon Tarot. Let me just zoom in because otherwise we won't be able to see the cards properly. By the way, I have specifically chosen only mass market decks, and the reason why is because I, generally speaking, when I use, and I mean really use my decks, I'm not exactly precious with them. So it's not like I damage them, of course not, but it may just so happen sometimes that when I shuffle, perhaps, I bend the cards or something like that. Although I always try to be very careful, of course. But just in case, these are the decks that I'm not going to be heartbroken if something happens to them, if they wear out, because I know that I'll be able to find them again. These are not out of print. And as I said, they are mass market. So in generally speaking, talking, they're not just mass market, they're actually on the lower end of the pricing range, because let me tell you, recently there's been some pricing of mass market decks, and I honestly do not know what to do with that. I honestly don't understand. I know for a fact that they don't cost that much, and I'm talking in specific about, for example, the Spirit Box Tarot, which is a voodoo tarot by Fabio Listrani. I know for a fact that in Italy that deck is priced at 30 euros, and it is actually one of those Los Carabel decks that is actually called Deluxe, I think it's called. It's a really big box. And I spent even less than that because when I got it, I actually got it with a discount voucher. But I know for a fact, and some of you have told me, that in other countries, it is priced at 80 US dollars. That's an extreme, but generally speaking, at around 60, 70 dollars. And I find that I think that we're missing out on the point of a mass market, mass produced deck. If we have to pay for a mass market deck the same price that we're paying for indie decks, we want something with the same kind of quality, but also we want something with the same kind of intention. So it is a contradiction in terms, because the intention of an indie deck is to have a limited production, and as a matter of fact, as a consequence of that, obviously is going to reach a smaller amount of people. Mass-produced items are the opposite of that. And we understand that if we go shopping to IKEA, and I have nothing against IKEA, if you come to my house, you'll see 50% of my furniture comes from IKEA. So I'm not bagging IKEA, please understand. But I'm saying we know that when we're going to shop for furniture at IKEA, not that it's cheap, to be honest, we know that chances are when we're going to visit a friend, they're going to have the same kind of furniture. So yes, we're not seeking out uniqueness. We're not seeking out be the only ones that have a specific deck when we buy a mass produced or a mass market deck. So why are we expected to pay for that premium that we're not getting? This is a rant over. Sorry about that. I accept if you disagree with me. Of course, I accept that. I do understand that in some cases there's the quality, there's the product value. They may be really extremely, let's say, expensive cardstock or other items, a special gilding, a really insightful book, a really chunky book. Absolutely, I get that, I understand, but justifying 80 US dollars for a mass-produced deck is just not acceptable for me. And I'm here and I'm open to any kind of discussions, just as long as we keep it friendly and respecting and respectful. But this is my opinion. Anyway, talking about the Divya Moon Tarot, this is by Patrick Valenza. It's one of my favorite decks for shadow work. And this is literally one of the decks that I actually use all the time. So when it comes to my rotation, for example, I sometimes feel the need to include in my monthly decks a deck that will help me get a little bit deeper into the core of the problem. Sometimes when I'm experiencing an issue of any kind, I feel like I need to get a bit dirty, down and dirty, with the meaning of the cards and the way in which I relate to the cards, or the feelings that I have, or my emotional reaction, my gut reaction to the card. And I feel that the imagery in this deck is excellent to do just that. So we can love it or hate it, or even be neutral towards this deck. But there are a lot of visceral reactions that I feel out of myself and out of a lot of people that I know in the tarot community when we're looking at this deck. And this is one of the decks that I always feel like taking and using, actually using, when I feel like I need to double check on my gut's feeling. So I've now decided to show you an oracle deck. So we're going to do this. I'm going to show you 5 tarot decks and 5 oracle decks, and I'm going to alternate between them. So the first one was a tarot deck. This one is an oracle deck, and it's called the Deadly Apothecary Oracle by the Priestess Moon. Poisonous plants as guides and healers. This is published by Rockbow. It's a I was going to say it's a recent release, but to be honest, I think it might be even 8 or 10 months old. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that I got it as soon as it was released. So obviously, and I've been using it practically every day. So it does feel to me like it's probably older than what it actually is. This is one of those decks that I really love out of Rockpool. I feel that sometimes with Rockpool is a bit of a hit and miss in the sense that they have a focus on numbers of releases rather than just quality. And please understand, I'm not saying that they're not quality based. Of course they are. But at the same time, it feels like if you come out with 4 or 5 oracle decks and maybe 1 tarot deck every month, that comes at a detriment for quality sometimes. There's only so many wonderful, wonderful and completely renewing kind of experiences that you can have with 5 or 6 decks, new decks every month. For the full year, we're talking about 70, 80 decks a year. It's a lot. And I know that, of course, they're trying to reach all the corners of the market, and it's absolutely fine. This one, however, it is a fantastic deck. The reason why I love this deck so much, and the reason why I actually use this deck all the time, is not just because it's actually rather beautiful aesthetically. This is the kind of color palette that I really like, even though I realize that I'm saying that whilst looking at a black and white card. So let me just do like that. But so as I was saying, these are actually colors that I really like. So relatively restricted in the color gamut, but I really, really appreciate the consistency throughout the cards. But it's because the intention, or let's say the theme of this deck, is to indeed show you deadly plants. So it shows you the deadly part of the plant, but it also talks about the antidote to the poison of the plant. So if we are talking about stinging nettle, for example, rethink restriction. So this is obviously talking about the astringent power of the stinging nettle, but at the same time, it's talking about blood circulation and how we need to let go of boundaries that we are actually imposing upon ourselves and rethink those kind of restrictions and limits, because they lead to nothing. If we are already restricting our thinking, our way of approaching things and experiencing things, we will end up not experiencing anything. So this is literally just the antidote to that sense of closing. You know, when you're scared, of course, think about fire, for example. Obviously, if you burnt yourself, you will have as an instinct a fear of fire. So you will never get close to fire ever again unless you do therapy on it and you work on it. I'm exaggerating now. Of course, I'm trying to oversimplify to make a point. But at the same time, it is very human to, and it's instinctual to step away from something that may harm us, may hurt us, may damage us. But when we do that with our thinking, with our mind, it's at the same time an overprotection. So when we're looking at this, we're understanding what the cause of many of our pattern and behaviors are, but at the same time, we're also understanding what the solution would be. So for each and every one of these cards, you not only understand and start learning things about these plants, which can always be very interesting, but at the same time, there is a very open and honest look at how we are made as human beings and how we can actually relate to the plant world in such a way that is mirroring our spirits. And it's also showing us if sometimes we made a mistake, there is a way out of that and there is a way to get back on the right track. Loving this deck. And, you know, it's also really pairing well with some of the tarot decks that I really love, and I'm thinking about the Tarot of the Drowning World, for example. This is the Drowning World is also botanical in nature, and it pairs up really well with this one. So if you're thinking, oh gosh, no, just another botanical deck, I know what you're feeling. I have said that myself so many times before, and I have been known for rehoming botanical decks, especially when it comes to oracle decks, but I can assure you this one is different, and I'm not just saying it, this one is actually different. It's not just plants, it's not just the meaning of the plants and what they can do for you. This is actually talking about the poison that is in these plants and the way in which you can actually turn it around. It's almost as if we were telling you how to read tarot reversals by applying an action to flip them up right. So this is a very interesting deck, and it's one of the decks that I use all the time. And now we're moving on to a tarot deck as promised. So I'm talking about the Bonfire Tarot. This is by Bybee Angus West, and I have 3 editions of this deck because there are 3 editions, or rather still in print. I believe there's probably just one, the one with linen cardstock, which is a mass market one. This one is the original. Sorry, not the original. This is the first mass market edition. So as you can see, it's got a very glossy finish to the cardstock. But I have to be honest, and I have to admit that even though I'm not necessarily a glossy kind of person, I do prefer my semi-gloss, or even in many cases, that papery feel of the matte finish to cardstock. However, when you're looking at the colors that you find in these images, I love the fact that they chose a glossy cardstock for this particular edition, because it just really makes the colors pop. I don't know if you can tell that through the lens. And it is a gloomy day today in Sydney, so we don't necessarily have a lot of light. I hope that is still rather clear. This is an amazing deck. It's a very fiery deck, as you can imagine, being called the Bonfire Tarot, but it's also because the energy that comes out of these cards is one of those all-encompassing kind of energies that really wraps you up, and sometimes you feel the warmth coming out of this deck, but you have to be careful because it's a very short step from feeling the warmth to being burned. And it is one of those decks. There's a lot of fire elements in this deck, regardless of the suit. Of course, we're looking at the suit of coins. In this case, is the suit of earth, if we're looking to an elemental approach, but you will still see the element of fire. And the element of fire is something that is not just common, but is actually leading. So it's a leading, or it's a leitmotif throughout all of these cards, and it's very helpful for the reader in order to understand and feel the cohesiveness of the cards and the way in which to approach them or to read them. I absolutely love what Bybee has done with these images. I'm always in awe of the fantastic creativity that she uses when producing this. Ironically, I have to say, I'm forever looking for the Word of Sarah Howard, the Oracle deck. I know that it's an indie deck, and it's out of print, of course, and it goes for super expensive prices. And ironically, I was super happy because a couple of years ago, she actually reprinted that, and I got a copy, and I could not use it. I had to rehome it. I was heartbroken because it was different from the first edition. It had, I don't know how to explain that, but basically it, instead of having keywords, it had sentences, which sometimes I'm happy with, but I'm happy with when I can actually read them when they're at the bottom of the card. But my eyesight is not good enough, and I could not read the letters on that deck on the second edition. So if you know which one I mean, is the one that has sentences rather than keywords, and they're written pretty much all over the place, and they are written on a ribbon, but the ribbon is not necessarily very much of a contrast from the background images, so it's not very clear. And I know I'm being very difficult, and I'm not doing it on purpose. I love this card, by the way, the Four of Swords. Boy, do I feel like that right now. I feel like I've been taking a bath. although not an ice bath, but well, these are kind of bubbles. I thought they were ice cubes. So sometimes when it's really, really hot in Sydney, I feel like everyone would just want to plunge in a ice pool or something like that. So that I was saying that I really love that deck, the one with the keywords, and I'm not being picky and saying that the second edition was not for me, but because I really have trouble reading, and it really stops my flow. It stops my everything that relates to the way in which I read the cards. Because especially when I'm reading for somebody and not just for myself, I can probably take the time. But when I'm reading for someone, I'm very aware and conscious of the other person waiting for me to say something. And I'm just, stuck trying and make out what the cards are saying, what the message is saying. So I would probably read a deck like that only in an intuitive way, but that is just not enough, because if there are sentences, if there are keywords on the cards, I want to read them because I want to know what the creator wanted to express. I mean, if they're writing something, I want to read it. But in any case, all this to say, if you do have the Word of Sarah Howard, the first edition, the one with the keywords, not the sentences, and you want to rehome it, please let me know, because I'm really looking forward to that, to get a copy. This one is the Bonfire Tarot, and as I said, absolutely fantastic. I have 3 editions of this deck, including the Indian one. It is an amazing deck, so very fiery, very strong, very powerful. And don't forget that in probably a few days, I'm thinking less than a week, we're entering Sagittarius zodiac sign, which is another fire sign, which is obviously bringing about the energy of fire, the energy of wands. In specific, Sagittarius one is the decan of the 8 of wands, and I really love to find decks that reflect on that kind of fiery energy. So the Bonfire Tarot, I really love this deck, and it's one deck that I use all the time. Okay, so the next deck is probably going to be an oracle deck, and I have to be 1000% honest with you guys. I was thinking twice before talking about this, but I decided to be completely honest in this video because you deserve it, and it's also because I deserve it as well. I deserve to admit that sometimes I need to know what Kiana would do. So this is a deck published by Rockpool. It is relatively recent, but I think it has been around for probably 6 months. It's a very affordable deck. It is a very thin deck, and it doesn't even have a guidebook, but you will see that it does come with, let's say, a bit of a description on the backs. But this is literally what the name of the deck says. This is what will Keanu do. Each and every one of these cards, as you can see, show you Keanu Reeves in one of his movies. There's also a couple of cards that show you in a couple of famous photos he's being portrayed on. And there's also keywords. And I have to say, this is absolutely spot on. And every time that I pull a card, see, this one is famous because he's someone told him when he was in a show, a live show, someone told him, "You're breathtaking." And he answered that, "You too." And it was really immediate, it was spontaneous, it was really beautiful. It was a kind of a very fiery exchange, but also it makes us look at these celebrities almost as if they were relatable, almost as if they were not those millionaires that are living the life of a recluse in a super duper expensive mansion, etc. Be thoughtful, for example. These cards are absolutely fantastic when I'm looking for advice. And I know that, most people would probably just chuckle at hearing that. And maybe there's a lot of you that are being judging me right now. But I have to be honest, and I wanted to be, because I feel that, like me, there's other people out there that sometimes they feel they have to show some really difficult deck. Oh, this is a really difficult deck, but I use it every day because I'm so cool, because I read with this deck every day. And yes, I do use, between brackets, difficult decks, or let's put it this way, decks that require a bit of an effort. I do use them. I don't use them every day. Why? Because sometimes I'm tired, guys. There's no two ways around that. And I am And I would be a hypocrite if I said that I don't look for an easy deck sometimes. And we need to be compassionate. And I would be an hypocrite if I were being compassionate towards others and not myself. We need to be kind towards ourselves first and foremost, and then to others as well. And being kind to myself also means that I'm looking at Keanu, so obviously, it's a good feeling. But at the same time, I'm also picking a card once a day that is just very easy because the keywords are fantastic. And when you read at the back, it's very easy to understand it. And let me just show you. So I'm going to do a collective reading out of the What Would Keanu Do deck. So let's just very quickly shuffle this. And then I'm going to blindly pull a card, and I have to do that without looking at the backs, because this is one of the not so positive thing about this deck, is that obviously when you're pulling a card with the backs up, you can literally see what card that is because everything is written on the back. It is not a major deal breaker. Actually, it's not a deal breaker at all. It's just one of those things you have to be mindful about when you're picking a card. So I'm not looking, I'm literally looking away, even though you can't tell. But let me do like this, and I will pick this card. And this is a collective reading for all of us, and you'll see how easy it is to read with this deck and how much better it will make you feel. Laugh. Well, there you go. You know what I mean? This is the Magic Adventure. No, what it's called, the movie. Let me see, because it actually does say that. Billy and Ted's Excellent Adventure. When was this movie released? That was in 1989. Can you imagine? Of course, he would have been dressed like that, and he was just a kid back then. But at the same time, I know that this movie is quirky. I know that it's a bit nerdy as well, but it's something that makes you laugh. It's something that brings a smile to your face. So let's all start the day with a laugh. Let's all start the day with a smile, because I'm pretty sure that we already have enough issues on our table that are going to make us cry instead of smile. So why would we actually seek out crying or dealing with issues? Let's start the day with a smile, and then we'll face all of the issues that we have. So what we cannot do, it's important to have things that bring joy in your life. This was the first movie in a series of 3 that significantly helped Keanu make a name for himself. When he looks back on filming this original movie, the main thing he can remember is laughing like crazy. You know what? Good on you, Keanu. Good on you. Of course, bring it on. So I'm being completely honest. One of my most used decks is the What Will Keanu Do Oracle. And yes, I am a tarot reader for 36 years and a tarot collector, and some of my decks are worth thousands of dollars. And yet I use What Will Keanu Read almost every day. Don't judge me. Now, because I apparently like to contradict myself, the next deck is actually going to be one of those decks that I said that we don't necessarily have to show, because we don't necessarily have to tell people that we use difficult decks, of course. So this is the Hermetic Tarot. This is a mass market deck published by US Games, and it's by Geoffrey Dawson. This is based by the esoteric workings of the Secret Order of the Golden Dawn. So Golden Dawn, let's make a distinction. Golden Dawn is the order among which you can count also Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, though at a certain point of his life, he's decided to break up with the other members of the Golden Dawn. He became independent, and then he formed his own order and of the Eastern Temple. And what happened was that there was a bit of a revolution thanks to Aleister Crowley, because many of the Hermetic titles as assigned by the Golden Dawn that you can actually see here in the Hermetic Tarot have been changed by Aleister Crowley, because his intention was to bring the teachings or the knowledge of the Golden Dawn to the masses, or to the masses, not necessarily masses, but at least to make them more understandable so that more people could actually enjoy them. So there is a little bit of a change in the hermetic titles, and sometimes there is an oversimplification of the hermetic titles as assigned by the Golden Dawn. I have Thoth decks galore. I have plenty of them, even the Thoth-inspired decks. My favorite one is the Tabula Mundi, but today is not about that. Today is about a deck that I actually use all the time, and the reason is that I'm actually studying the hermetic titles. So the reason why we see these hermetic titles in the card is assigned by the Golden Dawn, and I feel like I needed to start with the Golden Dawn rather than starting from Aleister Crowley, because as I said, it's something that has come later. So, and the very original ones were by the Golden Dawn, and that's where I'm starting from. So this is not a pretty deck. If you thought that it was going to be also a beautiful deck, even though I have to say, okay, it might not be pretty, but it is let's say a very conducive deck. There is a lot of symbology in the cards, obviously because we're looking at the symbology by the Golden Dawn. But the most important thing for me, and let me just go to a non-major arcana, because otherwise what I'm saying doesn't make sense. And of course, it's difficult to find one because it's kind of in order. And I put all of the chord cards in there. There you go. First minor arcana. So you will see that this is the Two of Wands, and it's called the Lord of Dominion. There's the Three of Wands, Lord of Established Strength. Let me just show you, because now we are in Scorpio 3. So let me just go to the cups, and it is the 7 or the 8 of cups. So it's the 7 of cups, which there you go. It was at the bottom. So as always. So what I wanted to talk about is, and I wanted to show you, so you will probably know that the hermetic title on the Thoth Tarot for the 7 of Cups is the Lord of the debauchery. So it is excessive pleasure. So the Lord of excessive pleasure, as opposed to the Lord of illusionary success. And let me just put it here so you will see the difference. So the hermetic title is assigned by the Golden Dawn that you can find in the hermetic tarot, and the reason why I use this deck all the time as opposed to the Thoth is that I believe personally that when we're looking at all of the astrological influences of the planets of the Scorpio 3 decan, so the 7 of Cups, the illusionary success actually makes a lot more sense than the Lord of excessive pleasure or the Bosch that we find in the Thoth Tarot. So I'm not going to go into details because I'm actually doing a decan walk together with my members, my Sunlight and my Starlight members. So come join us if you want. I'm actually doing a lot of decks. I'm doing the explanation of the cards, the astrological influences, the majors and the minors. We're looking at the elemental approach. And then for each and every decan, I'm actually customizing a spread. And I'm also suggesting a couple of decks to use for that specific decan. And I'm also explaining everything by talking about a movie that I associate with that specific decan. And it's actually lots of fun. So I use this one all the time rather than a Thoth, and perhaps one day I will move to a Thoth deck or the Thoth deck, even though I have to say I have been using Thoth for a long time on and off, because 36 years is a long time. And the Thoth Tarot was probably one of the first 10 decks that I ever bought. So of course I've had it for a long time. I do have a greenie, by the way, edition of the Thoth, and then I have more recent ones. But I do appreciate that in this deck, I can actually confront my knowledge of the minors and the astrological influences in the decan that are reflected in the hermetic titles. I can confront them with the way in which tarot, the Thoth Tarot by Crowley actually reads them or shows them to us. And I do appreciate and I prefer these ones. They make more sense to me. They are more thought-provoking. And that was the reason, let's say the reason why this one was actually made, and it is different. If you thought that this one was going to be just another soft deck, I can assure you it's not. It is more faithful to the Golden Dawn, so you might want to check it out if you're interested in that. But this is definitely one of the decks that I use all the time. And now, also to be very honest, this is another, it's an Oracle deck, and it's another deck that I use all the time. And I am not going to apologize. It is one of those decks that to me feels like a hug deck, because sometimes we need a hug, and it's this one here. So this is the Magical Spirit Oracle, The Brilliance of You by Alexis Rakan. This is a production by Rockpool. It's not a very recent deck. I think that this deck has been going around for at least a year and a half. I could be wrong. What I adore about this deck is the fact that we have a lot to think about when we're looking at these cards. There are, let's say, messages and also keywords at the bottom, but there's also, more often than not, there's also messages in the cards themselves. So sometimes you will break before you bloom, okay? And then it says here, breaking into bloom, a time, a liberation, understanding. So as you can see, there's a core message on the cards themselves, then it's somehow reflected on the message at the bottom. But here, even in smaller font, you can actually find some keywords. So depending on how you work best with an oracle, perhaps sometimes you don't really want to focus on the message on the cards themselves, on the images as well. But you want to focus on one or two keywords, you have that, you have the possibility to do that. Sometimes you want to let your intuition take you wherever it wants, and then in that case, you might just want to focus on the title of the card, which is this one here. Or sometimes you just want to feel like someone is talking to you, and then you just read everything that is written on any of the cards, because it's almost as if you were having a full conversation with someone. This is literally one of the decks that I use the most. You can probably tell because the gilding is coming off. It looks dirty. I can assure you it's not dirty. It's just that when the gold gild is starting to get, little small dings and dents and stuff like that, it looks dirty. I adore this deck. It's so kind. It's so peaceful. It's almost as if it's one of those decks that tells you that everything is going to be fine, and it's not one of those decks that, let's say, it's saying that just because. You can actually feel that it literally cares about you, about the person that is reading with this deck, about the person you're reading this deck for. I do use it every now and then, but because it is one of those decks that it's not that easy to pair up with a tarot deck. I do pair it up, for example, with the Cozy Witch Tarot, but sometimes I'm doing a reading for which the Cozy Witch Tarot really doesn't work because it is very specific. And so I cannot necessarily use it with a tarot deck, but this is just absolutely amazing, and I highly recommend it. And it's one of those decks that it's gratitude cards, affirmation cards, hug deck, everything all at once, and it's just really working. It just works. You pull a card out of this deck for a month every morning, and I can guarantee you, you will actually feel better. If you feel a little bit discombobulated sometimes, this will definitely help you feel better. This is a deck that I use literally every day, and I have been using it. Even if it's not part of my monthly rotation, I would definitely use this deck. Maybe not every day if it's not in my monthly decks, but I would still pull cards out of this deck because it really is a wonderful deck. But now let's come to a tarot deck that is literally a deck that I use all the time because I'm a tarot reader. I am a professional tarot reader. So of course, when it comes to decks that I prefer, unless it's a very specific question, if it's a specific question related to relationship, if it's a specific question related to a career or a financial matter, if there's, I don't know, something very specific that suggests to me that I should use a different deck, this is what I use, because I just absolutely love this deck. And I have to be honest, at the beginning, I didn't like it because I used to be one of the aficionados extremely faithful to the Light Seers. And when they published the Unfolding Path Tarot, it felt like it wanted to take the Light Seers space. But then I decided to give it a go. And I have to say, I really love this deck. It has it ticks all the boxes. It has all of the, let's say, characteristics I'm looking for in a deck when I'm actually using it for a reading for someone else, for a client, of course. Ironically, do I use this deck for myself? Yes, I do. I do use it, but not necessarily for all of the readings that I do for myself. And this depends on the fact that when it comes to personal readings, I always have a very strong intention whenever I do a personal reading. And therefore, there will be a very, let's say, very focused kind of choice, almost to the point of narrowing it down first. I have a very strong process of narrowing down decks that I'm choosing when reading for myself. And, first I go through all of the decks that I think about using, then I choose only 4 or 5, and out of those 4 or 5s, there might be 2, and then out of those 2, but I may use both of those 2. So I never choose only one deck when I'm doing a reading for myself. I don't know if I'm being weird. I don't know if everyone else is doing it and I just don't know about it. But sometimes I actually use 2 different decks for the same reading. Why? Because different decks have different vibes, and sometimes I need to hear 2 sides of the story, which is absolutely understandable, at least to me. If it's not for you, then please let me know if I'm weird. I hope I'm not. Anyway, this deck is fantastic because, first of all, I love the colors. I really, really love all of these colors. They're just absolutely fantastic. I love the fact that they're not borderless. So ironically, I mean, they are borderless, but ironically, you actually see the white of the background. And I really think it works with bringing up and making these color pop even more. So I really love the way it's been thought of. It's been laid out, it's been produced, it's been created. I love that it's very inclusive. When we talk about DEI, this is one of the decks that I like to propose because it really is showing how they care about that. But it's also a spot-on reader. I mean, it's a very direct reader. This is one of the decks that you cannot ignore. Whenever there's a message coming out of these cards, you cannot just pretend that you're not hearing it, or you don't necessarily, let's say, pull another card. You know that sometimes there are decks that give you that possibility. I don't know, again, is it just me? When you're pulling a card, this is just not working. I know that you made a mistake, dear deck. Let me just pull again. I'll give you a chance to give me another card. And then you keep on pulling, and it's obviously, even if you're taking that card away, there will be another card that has exactly the same meaning. So it's not necessarily helping at all. But in any case, this is one of those decks that you really cannot turn back to. It wants to have a conversation with you. It wants to bring you in. There's a number of things that help this deck doing that. And this is a clear example. This is the Magician card. And there is this breaking of the 4th wall and looking directly at the reader. So obviously I'm the reader, I'm looking at this card, and the character on the card is looking back at me. So it feels almost as if there is this thought-provoking image that asks you to speak up, or perhaps look at my hands and realize that what I have are the resources that I need, and I don't necessarily need anything else. So stop looking around, stop pretending that you're not ready because you're missing something. You are ready, you have everything. And then there's images like this one, which is actually quite confronting because of the blood. And I know that some of us are not okay to see blood in a card, and I completely understand understand that. I'm not entirely happy about that, but I do also understand that there are cards that feel like that sometimes, and we cannot hide away from those moments as well. I love this moon card. I think it's one of my favorite moon cards of all times. I don't necessarily have a lot of really beautiful moon cards. I think that when it comes to creativity, creators sometimes just don't know what to do with the moon card. They do express a lot of creativity when it comes to the star cards, so I do have some pretty beautiful star cards, but when it comes to the moon, it's always a bit hit and miss, I feel. Same goes with the tower. But this is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the decks that I use all the time, and I really, really love it. And the next one is obviously an Oracle deck, and it's this one here. So this is the Lost Oracle by Fiona Horn. This is a very recent release by Rockpool. And I know that it sounds like a contradiction in term that I'm showing you a new deck as a deck that I use all the time. But it's also true that this deck has been in my rotation for the most part of October and basically the whole of November so far. This is an amazing deck because sorry, it's upside down, because for many, many reasons, it feels like a very witchy deck, but at the same time, it's not necessarily limited. So let me just explain this because I don't want to say anything offensive. I have a lot of witchy decks and I really love them, especially when it comes to a few tarot decks. The Sister Witch Tarot is one of my favorite decks of all times. But when it comes to an Oracle deck, I have a lot of witchy Oracle decks, but I feel that they are very limited in the way in which I approach them. So it's my fault. It's not the deck's fault. That's what I mean with that. The way in which I feel like I resonate with them whilst I'm using them is a very limited way, and it's also limited in time and also limited in the meaning of the practice or the way in which I'm using them. What I mean by that is that I don't feel like using those witchy decks all the time. This one, however, is as complete, as balanced to me, or it feels as balanced to me as a deck possibly can. So there's obviously a lot of witchy elements. There's obviously a lot of also Samhain related elements. We see the pumpkin here, for example, and there's also a lot of symbols. But then again, this is an elemental symbol. So obviously we're thinking about fire. We're thinking about the alchemical power of this element, and it's not necessarily witchy. Alchemy, of course, has been used in that way, but it is a discipline by itself. Enchantment, of course, use your words consciously. See, that's one of the reasons why I like to point out that it's a very balanced and also complete deck, because when you're looking at the image, you have your initial impact is of a witchy deck, and then you read the title, and then when you start relating to the deck and you start reading the message at the bottom, for example, for this one, Gallant, accept healing energies. This is very balanced. This could be a deck you bring with you when you're doing your yoga session, for example. This is a deck that you could use when you're doing your exercises in meditation, for example, or when you're doing your personal growth, your self-worth, when you're walking down a certain type of path. But it's not necessarily restricted to a witchy kind of use, and that's what I meant. Even though it is very beautiful, and yes, the images would look very nice. For example, it pairs up really well with the Fyodor Pavlov, but also it pairs up really, really well with the Tarot of the Hidden Realm, and even more so with the Witch Sister by Julia Jeffries Tarot. So obviously with witchy decks as well, but it is just very, very balanced to me when, as I said, you start working with it and you start reading and working and relating with the messages at the bottom. So the green man, for example, Carnuno, is it's time to grow. So you really relate to the card. It's time to grow. You could tell that to yourself at any time of your life. This is not something specific. This is something that can literally be a message that you need anytime in your life. Or papillon with your courage will be rewarded. Papillon is the French word for butterfly. Your courage will be rewarded. There is a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to transform this match from a cocoon, from a what's it called, a caterpillar to a cocoon to a butterfly. But you have to go through these stages in your life. You have to face and accept there are seasons in life, and these seasons bring change with them. So it takes a lot of courage, but your courage will be ultimately rewarded. Really loving this deck. It is a lot deeper than what it looks like. I know that, because there is, I'd say, something to be said about the limited color palette, of course, and it also feels like it's a bit minimalist when it comes to the line stroke and everything. But it doesn't matter, because we're not always talking about works of art when we're talking about decks. And this is a deck that I'm absolutely fine with using every day, because I find that every day that I use it, every time that I use it, I actually get something out of this deck. And it's a very complete and balanced experience. And the next deck is not just one of the decks that I use all the time, but it's also one of my oldest decks. This is the Osho Zen Tarot, and as you can see, I have 3 copies of this deck, and also the mini one, which I'm actually kind of using a lot lately, because I like the fact that I can do even bigger spreads with that and not occupying a lot of space. So yeah, this one has been, it's not ruined. I wouldn't say that it's ruined. Like I've used decks even more than this one, and I've definitely made a lot more damage than this, but you can really tell that it's one of those decks that start to frame by the edges and everything. It is one of the decks that I actually love to talk about, because it literally changed the way in which I read tarot, and it was one of the first decks that gave me the idea that I could use tarot for myself, not just for reading, but also to become a better person, or at least to try and become a better person. It is one of those decks that was so introspective to me, and that did so much to make me feel better through really tough times in my life. And I'm talking actual really tough times, that I will always be grateful to this deck. It's one of those decks that really feels like it has its own personality, and it's a wonderful personality. It's one of those personalities that supports you no matter what. It's one of those decks that doesn't necessarily shy away from telling you something that you need to hear, even in a direct manner, and perhaps even sometimes confrontational. Like sometimes there are cards that are difficult to accept, but because they're very direct. But at the same time, you kind of need this. Even this one here, for example, isolation. This is the 3 of Grace and the 3 of Swords. And it's one of those cards that really brings about the nature of this conflict, of this heartbreak, but at the same time, it is in the mind, because it's something that takes overwhelm. It's something that it's too difficult to compute for us. And so we're just going through this time, and there is a release valve in each and every one of us, and we need to use it sometimes. And so these tears are actually beneficial, because while we're shedding tears at the same time, it's the only thing that we can do to break the ice, to melt the ice. And perhaps at a certain point, we will be completely defrosted. So we will not be stuck, and our mind will be free again. This is one of those decks that it's not actually an RWS clone, because I really think that there are a lot of renaming in the cards themselves that really give you an additional layer of interpretation of the cards. But it's one of those decks that really gives you the possibility to become a better reader, actually makes you a better reader, actually gives you a different perspective on how to interpret the cards. And next time that you will read, once you master this deck and you will go back to reading the RWS, you will remember these cards. You will remember the additional perspective. And sometimes you will actually accept to adopt the other perspective and not just stick to the RWS, because sometimes for the 7 of Wands, stress means a lot more than you ever thought an RWS could point to. So it is a very stressful situation. You're juggling too many things. It almost feels like a 9 of wands in the traditional RWS. But at the same time, it actually invites you to understand whether all of this that you're doing is it really necessary? Are you overdoing it because you have to? Or are you overdoing it because perhaps you never took a time off and you never had the possibility to go through all of your things, and all of a sudden everything feels like it's a priority when it actually is not? So absolutely loving this deck, and I would say it's probably one of the decks that I use most at all times in all of the years and decades that I've had it. And lastly, that's another oracle deck, and we're going to end on a very positive, I hope, note, because it's this one here. This is the Inner Child Oracle by Amanda Lynn Aisling, and this is a Hay House release. It's a 44 card deck. This is an incredibly supportive deck. It is called the Inner Child Oracle. It is also very beautiful because it is, well, it's a collage deck. So obviously it depends on you. It's very personal. You might not like collage decks sometimes. So if you don't like a collage deck, you might not like this deck. It does a lot of cosmic vibes, I have to say. And because of the cosmic vibes, I actually really love to pair it up with the Star Child Tarot, because the Star Child, between the Moon Child and the Star Child, I'm an air sign, so I had to go with the Star Child because it obviously refers a lot more to the element of air to me rather than the Moon Child, which is more like a watery deck. So this is, as I said, really strong airy vibe, very strong cosmic vibes. But at the same time, it also brings me back to the inner child. And there is something that I had to work on it. I had to work on this deck or with this deck in order to appreciate this deck, which is ironically making me like this deck even more. Because sometimes when your initial reaction, like in my case, my initial reaction with this deck was like, this is not an inner child work deck. This deck I cannot use for inner child work. Why do they market it that way? It is a mass market deck, so they obviously want to target as many of us as possible. So they're generally pretty good. I mean, we're talking about Hay House, a company that has been dealing with tarot and oracle decks for so many years now that they really know how to advertise and target and market their decks. And so my initial reaction was, have they lost the plot? Do they not understand that these cosmic vibes do not actually resonate when you're trying to do child work? And then I actually decided to start working with this deck. And I finally found out that it is a fantastic deck for inner child work. So the trick with this is to kind of not focus too much on the multiple stars that you can see in practically every card, but to really focus on the vibes of the images and also really focus on the messages. So for example, in this card, this is card number 42, so it's very easy to go to the guidebook if you want to. And it says, you deserve to be seen. Let yourself be known. See, so what I love about this deck, and that's one of the reasons why I use it all the time, is that I always seek out for a conversation with a deck. And so that's why I love pairings, because it feels like there is this conversation and I'm listening in. This deck, ironically, has each and every card has a conversation with itself. So it's almost as if it were telling something with the image, but then there is this communication, a conversation going on. It says, you deserve to be seen. And then somebody else answering, let yourself be known. So it is ironic, but I feel that it only works with this deck. And if I had this kind of setup for a different deck, I wouldn't like it. I don't know if I make sense, but because there's messages and there's two messages and it literally feels like it's two characters in a book. And when you're reading the dialogue, it shows you the brackets, to point out that someone is talking out loud. And it feels like it is exactly the same thing, but there's just two characters talking to each other. I love it for it, but I also think that they they really were lucky in succeeding with this, because had it been a different deck, I probably would not have appreciated. So breathe in, practice breath work today. Seek guidance in this. It is time for a different perspective. So I love the fact that it is talking and answering to itself. Really, really love working with this deck. It is tailored to child work, inner child work. It may not feel so by looking at the images, as I said, but if you focus on the messages, you will understand why I really mean that. And it is one of those decks that it is a one of a kind, because it is not easy, trust me. Sometimes people think that you can just put on a couple of images. Perhaps when it's a collage deck, you just cut out a few pieces, you put them together, and then you find something supportive and you slap a sentence at the bottom. Trust me, it does not work that way. You really have to channel your intention in creating a deck, even an oracle, even more than a tarot deck, I believe. I could be wrong, but in any case, this is one of the decks that I use all the time, and it comes very often in my deck rotation. Now, that was it for today. Let me know what your most used decks are, and please be free, and please feel like you can actually share it with us, because this is a safe space. There is absolutely no judgment here. I will never judge you. If you tell me that you also use the What Would Keanu Do and you use it every day, as you could see, I am a tarot reader and collector for 36 years, and yet I have absolutely no problems in revealing to everyone that that is one of my most used decks, because yes, I feel like it works for me, and it may be working for somebody else as well. So let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.